You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The cab ride from the airport felt like I was in a bad movie. The driver wouldn't stop talking about his daughter's volleyball win, his voice blasting through the silence I desperately craved. I nodded politely, half listening, only catching snippets like, "We're gonna get her a scholarship," and "You should have seen the other team's coach. He was fuming." But my mind wasn't on some random middle school volleyball match. It was on Mallory. I hadn't expected to come back early. The training in Denver had been canceled at the last minute, and I wanted to surprise her. Pick up some flowers. Maybe a bottle of wine. I hadn't done that in a while. The cab stopped in front of the house, and the sight of it sent a strange wave of something through me. It looked too perfect. The lawn was freshly mowed, the windows clean. The front door even had that new, shiny coat of paint we'd been talking about for months. But something was off. That feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. I walked in through the front door, flowers in hand. The smell of cinnamon candles and fresh laundry greeted me. The house was silent. Too silent. Then I saw it. A leather satchel on the coffee table. It wasn't mine. I froze, the flowers suddenly feeling heavy in my hand. Mallory had a bag. Sure, but not one like this. This was a high-end, dark brown number, all polished and sleek. I took a few steps closer, the air suddenly thick in my lungs. Upstairs. I had to check upstairs. I didn't know why, but I did. I reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I heard voices, muffled but unmistakable. Mallory, and someone else. The sound of soft laughter made my skin crawl. I pushed open the bedroom door without knocking. They didn't even hear me at first. Mallory, tangled in the sheets, her face flushed, and him, Dorian, her boss. The finance exec who could have played a role in some sleazy 80s movie, all slick hair and too much confidence. He looked at me with that smug, cocky smile as if he'd been expecting me. I didn't yell. I didn't even flinch. "I sent the video to your wife," I said, my voice quiet but carrying. Dorian's smile faltered as his phone buzzed. The panic in his eyes was instant. He reached for it, but I didn't move. "I'll give you a moment," I said, turning on my heel and heading back downstairs. I didn't need to hear him beg. I didn't need to see Mallory try to explain. She'd already said enough. I didn't look back when I walked out of that bedroom. I could hear Mallory's voice, cracking with emotion, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse she was about to pour out, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing it was even affecting me. I grabbed my jacket from the coat hook, threw it on, and marched out the front door. The cold hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to shake off the feeling in my chest. The flowers I'd brought still dangled from my hand, but I couldn't even bring myself to toss them. They were pointless now. As I sat in the living room, Dorian fidgeted on the couch, his phone buzzing incessantly. I let it ring, let it build up. He was in my house on my couch, and he had the nerve to look anywhere but at me. The sound of a ringing phone finally broke through the tension, and Dorian's eyes darted toward it like a trapped animal. His hand hovered over his phone but stayed frozen when it rang again. He didn't have the guts to answer it. "Go ahead," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Pick it up. It's your wife." He swallowed hard, his face pale now, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't need to know who was on the other end. I already knew. Dorian fumbled with the phone, but before he could get it to his ear, I heard a woman's voice cut through the speaker. "Dorian, where are you?" Vivian's voice was calm, too calm. "I've been calling you for hours." Dorian's breath hitched. He raised his hand to his forehead, wiping it, but the panic in his eyes was still there. He held the phone out to me. It's... Before he could finish, Vivian's voice came through again, this time sharper, colder. "Dorian? What the hell is going on? Who is that? Why are you not at home?" I heard him exhale slowly, too slow. Then, she heard it. My voice. "Vivian, you might want to sit down," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Your husband's in bed with my wife." Silence. The kind of silence that could break a person. I could practically hear her brain processing it, the shock clawing its way through the wires. "What?" she whispered, too quiet at first, then louder, more controlled. "What the hell did you just say?" I didn't flinch. "I think you heard me." Dorian's eyes were wide now, pleading. He started to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His hands trembled. He had nothing left. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard her voice again, but it was different, cold, cutting through the air. "Don't come home," she said, her tone final. "I'm done." The phone went dead in his hands. I watched him scramble, his face flushed with panic, trying to pretend like he could salvage anything. But it was too late for that. I stood up, the silence in the room heavy, suffocating. "Get out." I spoke quietly, but there was no mistaking the command in my voice. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear, real fear. He knew there was no point in trying to talk his way out of this. He just stood up, grabbed his things, and walked out of the door without a word. Mallory had stopped crying by the time he left. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face pale and empty, like she was trying to make sense of what had just happened. She didn't speak, didn't try to apologize again. She just watched me, but I couldn't look at her. Not then, not now. I turned my back to her and walked into the kitchen, the stillness of the house pressing against me. The flowers, dropped on the counter, mocked me. Couldn't breathe. My mind kept replaying everything I'd missed. The late-night meetings, the secrets, the gifts she'd never told me about. The way Dorian's name came up so often in casual conversation. It hit me in waves, like a slow realization that I had been living in someone else's life. The one I thought was mine. I sat down, head in my hands, trying to push back the rage, but it just kept coming. Everything felt hollow, empty. The next morning, I didn't sleep at all. I had no idea how to sleep after that. I dressed in the same clothes, the ones I'd worn the day before, and drove into the city. Vivian's townhouse was even more impressive in daylight. A corner unit, high ceilings, sleek glass windows with the kind of view people only dreamed of. I rang the doorbell, trying not to show how much I wanted to get this over with. When she opened the door, she was perfectly composed, as if she had been waiting for this. She didn't look surprised, didn't seem angry. She just looked tired. "Come in," she said, her voice cool, detached. I followed her inside, unsure of how to feel about the woman who just found out her husband was as much a liar as mine. We didn't sit down to pleasantries. Instead, we started trading evidence. She handed me a folder thick with papers, and I did the same. Photos, texts, financial records. The betrayal was clear on both sides. Vivian didn't flinch as she flipped through my folder, the same way I didn't when she laid out her own. When she finished, she pushed the papers aside and looked at me, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You want to destroy him," she said, flat. "We can do that. Together." Her voice didn't have any pity in it, only the cold clarity of someone who had already moved on. "I want to see him burn," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. I'll help you." She pulled a card from the stack of papers on the table. "This is Marla Jennings, best divorce attorney in the city. She doesn't lose." I took the card, the weight of it settling in my hand. This was real now. This wasn't just a betrayal I had to swallow. It was a war. "I'll get in touch with her today," I said. Vivian smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was a business smile, all sharp edges. "We'll take him down, piece by piece." I walked into Marla Jennings' office with a kind of numbness, but also a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in days. I had a purpose now. This wasn't just about surviving what had happened. This was about taking control. Marla was everything I'd heard about her. Tall, sharp, and with the kind of presence that made you feel like you were in the presence of someone who didn't just know the law, but could bend it to her will. She didn't waste time on niceties. Her office was sleek and clinical, the furniture modern, but the walls lined with awards and certifications that screamed, "I get results." "You're Jude, right?" Her voice was low, steady. The type of voice that made you pay attention whether you wanted to or not. She didn't look up when she spoke, just kept typing something on her computer. Her paralegal, Cassie, sat across the desk from her, typing away on a tablet with quick, practiced fingers. Yeah, I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm here about the divorce. Marla looked up finally, her eyes appraising, but there was no judgment in them. Sit down, she said, nodding to the chair in front of her desk. I took a seat, leaning forward, hoping I looked like I knew what the hell I was doing. She steepled her fingers and leaned back in her chair. Let's get one thing clear from the start, she said, her gaze never wavering from mine. This isn't about feelings. It's about outcomes. You're here for a reason. You want to take your wife and her lover down, right? I didn't hesitate. Yeah. Good. She paused, then gave a short nod. First things first, we need everything. Financial records, emails, texts, photos, anything that ties your wife to him, and preferably anything that ties him to her through his company. Cheating matters in this state. It can affect everything from alimony to the division of assets. Without proof, you're just a guy with a story. I clenched my jaw, the weight of what she was saying sinking in. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. I had to think bigger. This was about making sure they didn't get away with it. She continued, flipping through a file on her desk as she spoke. I'm filing the paperwork for the divorce today, but that's just the start. I'll have Cassie dig into your wife's financials, check her spending, and I'll have Alan. She paused as she pointed to the younger guy sitting at a desk behind me. Alan looked up from his laptop, nodded, then went back to whatever he was doing. Alan will start tracking Dorian's financials, especially anything that could look like corporate fraud. Trust me, we'll find something. Dorian's company? I asked, the pieces falling into place. It hadn't hit me before, but now it made sense. The finance guy was so comfortable with Mallory and his influence, he probably had his fingers in a lot of dirty pies. Exactly, Marla said, tapping her fingers on the desk. You want to hit him where it hurts? Follow the money, his assets, his business dealings. I promise you, I'll find something that makes him wish he'd never crossed you. The cold efficiency in her words almost gave me whiplash. She wasn't here for justice or some romanticized version of revenge. She was here to win. I leaned back in my chair, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I wasn't on defense anymore. I wasn't just trying to survive. I was finally taking action. This wasn't some reactionary mess. This was a strategy. I was going to walk out of here with a plan. I looked at Marla. What do you need from me? She smiled. It wasn't warm. It was sharp, like a wolf seeing prey. Everything you've got. Proof of the affair. Texts, emails, bank statements. I'll need to know exactly where they've been meeting, who knew about it, how much they've been spending on gifts and trips. And most importantly, I'll need to know how much money Dorian has that's not tied up in his company. If he's got anything hidden, we'll find it. And I need to stay calm, right? I said, the reality of that sinking in. I wasn't a guy who usually kept his temper in check. Marla nodded. Exactly. We're not here to let emotions control the situation. Keep your head, stay professional, and let me do the heavy lifting. Get me the facts and I'll do the rest. We'll make sure you walk away with everything you're entitled to. I sat there for a moment, absorbing the gravity of it all. I hadn't been sure what to expect coming into her office. But this was different. Marla wasn't interested in sympathy or support. She was interested in results. And for the first time since I walked into that house and saw Dorian with Mallory, I felt like I had a shot at something real. I nodded. Okay, I'll get everything you need. Marla stood up and gestured toward Alan. Alan, get his contact info. Cassie, get started on the financials. We'll need everything by the end of the week. Cassie stood and walked over to me, handing me a clipboard with a checklist. Start with the basics, she said, her voice calm and professional. Your wife's bank statements, credit card bills. Anything that shows she was spending time with him. Then we'll get into the rest. I took the clipboard, my mind already moving to the next step. I'll get on it today. Marla gave me a sharp nod, her eyes narrowing with a hint of satisfaction. We're not here to play nice, Jude. Let's win this. I stood up, the weight of the moment settling over me. The world I'd known had fallen apart. But now I was doing something about it. And for the first time, it felt like I was finally on the offense. The world Dorian had spent years building began to collapse quickly, and I was watching it unravel piece by piece. Vivian's legal team didn't waste any time. They froze Dorian's assets the moment the paperwork was filed, pulling everything into a hold. His properties, his investments, all of it was locked up tighter than a vault. I didn't even have to ask how they managed it. Vivian wasn't the type to sit back and wait for things to play out. She was in control. Always. Dorian, the smooth-talking, silver-tongued guy who thought he could get away with anything, couldn't talk his way out of this. Not with Vivian's team on him. They started dismantling his alibi piece by piece: emails, phone records, hotel stays, anything they could find to show where he'd been and who he'd been with. It didn't take long before they uncovered the inconsistencies. The trips he'd taken for business, but were really just an excuse to be with Mallory. The receipts he'd thought were hidden. It all came crashing down on him. Then came the next blow. Internal auditors at his company started sniffing around. Apparently, Dorian had been mixing business with pleasure. Mallory, as it turned out, had been benefiting from special treatment, preferential projects, lavish gifts, a promotion she hadn't earned. That was a golden ticket for the auditors to dig deeper. It didn't take long before they started questioning his judgment, wondering how many other lines he'd crossed. By then, the board had gotten involved. Dorian's charm, his usual tactic of flattering and schmoozing his way out of trouble, had no effect on them. The pressure kept building, and they couldn't avoid the whispers anymore. They were starting to take a closer look at Dorian's ethics. It was only a matter of time before the board made their move. I heard from a source close to Dorian's company that they were considering a full investigation into his misuse of funds. They were tightening the screws, and it wasn't looking good for him. He was on the edge, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Mallory was sinking fast. Her polished corporate PR shield had fallen apart, leaving her exposed. She wasn't hiding behind Dorian's position at the firm anymore. No one was there to cover her tracks. She had no choice but to leave her cushy apartment and start couch surfing with friends. I wasn't sure who was more ashamed, her or the people who had to let her in. I got a text from an old colleague who worked at her firm, telling me Mallory was no longer welcome there. That had to sting. They distanced her so fast, it was like she had the plague. She wasn't part of their shiny, successful world anymore. And honestly, I wasn't shedding any tears for her. The thing was, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt numb. Seeing her fall apart was only a small piece of it, and it didn't undo the damage. The damage that was already done, the lies, the betrayal, it was all still there. It had already changed everything. I found myself staring at my phone more than usual, waiting for something. A message. A phone call. I don't know. Some sign that it was over, that it was real. But it just felt like I was waiting for an ending that wasn't coming fast enough. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, it was all starting to crack under the pressure of real-world consequences. Dorian's reputation was in freefall, and Mallory, without the safety net of her career or her connection to him, was nothing but a person I used to know. I didn't feel pity for her. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just done. The more I heard about what was happening to them, the clearer it became. They'd built their lives on a house of cards, and it was all coming down. Dorian's work life was about to implode. Mallory's career was gone, and she was facing the fallout from the people who'd once supported her. It wasn't just their personal lives that were affected. It was everything they'd worked for, everything they thought was solid, crumbling into dust. But I was no longer wrapped up in their mess. I wasn't watching from the sidelines, waiting for their self-destruction to satisfy me. It was happening, and I didn't need to be a part of it anymore. What mattered now was what I was doing next, what I was building, not the wreckage of what they left behind. I learned something through all this, something I couldn't have seen before. Watching them fall apart wasn't going to fix what they'd broken in me. It wasn't going to fix the time I'd lost, the trust I'd given, the way they had taken advantage of me. The world wasn't going to make sense again just because they were getting what they deserved. It was up to me to put it back together. And that's what I was going to do. Starting now. I walked through the door and felt something settle in my chest. An unsettling quiet. It wasn't the usual hum of the house, the faint sound of the refrigerator or the air conditioning running in the background. It was still, almost too still. Mallory was sitting on the couch, her legs pulled up to her chest, her eyes red. She didn't even look like herself. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her face exhausted. I could smell the faintest hint of stale tears in the air. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw it, the way her whole body tensed, the way her lips parted, like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words right away. When she finally did, it was almost like she was trying to hold herself together. "Jude," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I didn't say anything. I just set my bag down and watched her, waiting. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking to fight. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her either. She let out a shaky breath and wiped at her eyes. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But..." I raised my hand, just enough to stop her before she could start spinning it. "No, don't. Just don't." Her face crumpled for a second, but she quickly pulled herself back together. "Jude, I never meant for it to go this far. I made a mistake. It's just, he made me feel special. You know? And things were. They were so hard between us. We were drifting, and I didn't know how to fix it. Dorian, he's just..." Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head, like she was searching for a way to explain something that wasn't explainable. I stayed quiet, watching her. I wasn't going to interrupt her anymore. I wanted her to keep talking, keep digging the hole deeper. Maybe then she'd realize that there wasn't a way out. She stood up and walked toward me, her hands shaking as she reached for mine. I didn't move. I didn't pull away, but I didn't take her hand either. Her fingers hovered there for a second, before she dropped them and stepped back. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "We've been growing apart for so long, and I wanted to fix it. I thought if I just tried harder, if I gave more, things would change. I just couldn't see how bad it had gotten. Maybe I needed more time. Maybe we need therapy, Jude. We can work through this. We can fix it." She was rambling now, and it was all falling apart. Her words were starting to sound hollow, even to her. I wasn't angry, but I was done. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the wall. "No, Mallory," I said, my voice steady, no emotion in it. "It's not about time, and it's not about therapy. You crossed a line that can't be erased. You betrayed me, and you've already made your choice." Her mouth opened like she was going to argue, but she stopped herself. I could see the realization hit her, slow and heavy. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes searching my face like she was waiting for some sign of forgiveness. But I didn't give it to her. I didn't need to. She turned away, walking slowly to the bedroom. I could hear her rummaging through drawers, shuffling things around. The sound was faint, but it was loud in the silence. When she came back, she was holding a suitcase. She didn't say anything. Neither of us did. Mallory took a deep breath and walked toward the door, her movements slow, almost mechanical. I stood there, watching, but I didn't move to stop her. I didn't even try to say anything else. When she opened the door, I finally spoke again. "I hope you figure out what you want, Mallory, but it's over." Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a split second, I thought she might break. But she didn't. She didn't beg. She didn't try to fix it. She just nodded, and in that moment, I saw it, the defeat. She closed the door behind her without a word, and it was done. I stood there for a few minutes, just listening to the silence of the house, the door clicking shut, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the relief I expected. It wasn't a victory. It was just the end. I didn't need to fight anymore. The battle had already been won, and it wasn't in the noise or the drama of a fight. It was in the quiet, when the door closed and everything finally stopped. I didn't want to be in that bedroom anymore. I didn't want to sleep in that bed. Didn't want to feel the ghost of her next to me when I closed my eyes. So I started pulling everything apart. The bed frame was heavy, but I didn't care. I didn't want it to be a smooth process. I wanted it to be work. Something I could feel, something I could control. The mattress came first. It was bigger than I thought, like it had some kind of hold on me. I dragged it off the bed frame and tossed it onto the floor, like it didn't matter anymore. The sheets? They came off in a mess of fabric, all twisted up with a few of her hairs still caught in them. I stuffed everything into the truck. The bed frame came next, followed by the dresser, the nightstand. The whole damn room, piece by piece, until nothing was left but bare wood floors and a sad, empty space. I didn't stop. I drove everything to the city dump. The truck bumped along the uneven road, the sounds of it filling the silence like a drumbeat. I pulled up to the compactor, got out, and watched them load the mattress in. I don't know why I expected something big to happen when it crushed. But when the machine crunched down on the bed, the sound was final. Felt like a weight lifting off my chest. The bed, everything it stood for, was gone. And with it, whatever I'd been holding on to. I didn't want to keep the remnants of that life. The room that had once been ours didn't belong to either of us anymore. The next day, I called a renovation crew. I wanted everything changed, down to the floors, the walls, the whole vibe. I needed it to be mine, not a place where pieces of a broken past still lingered. I picked a deep slate blue for the walls, dark and rich, nothing like the light, airy neutrals Mallory had always preferred. I needed something that felt strong, something solid I could build from. The workers came in, dust and tools everywhere, scraping away what was left of the old paint. The air smelled like fresh wood and paint, the sharp bite of chemicals mixing with the sawdust. It was the smell of transformation. When the floors were refinished and the walls were painted, it didn't even feel like the same house. It was a new space, one that wasn't tainted by memories of her. I went shopping, picking out a new bed, a new couch, a few chairs, nothing fancy, but everything felt more like me. I went for a minimalist style, something clean with deeper tones and soft textures that felt good, not just visually but in my hands. There was no trace of Mallory's influence here, just mine. I didn't look at the bedroom the same way again. When it was all set up, bed made with crisp white sheets, the new headboard in place, pillows stacked neatly, it felt different, quiet, in a good way. That night, I lay down in that new bed for the first time. It was strange, peaceful but strange. I sank into the mattress, and for the first time in months, my body didn't stiffen when I closed my eyes. No anxiety, no anger, just the sound of my own breath and the steady rhythm of the night. I slept through the night. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't wake up in the middle of the night, restless and turning over everything in my head. I slept like I hadn't in years, deep and uninterrupted. The weight of what I'd been carrying was gone. The bed, the space, the life I had built with Mallory, it was all gone now, replaced by something new, something that belonged to me. And in that stillness, that peace, I felt it, like a door finally closing. Not in anger or bitterness, but with a kind of quiet, undeniable relief. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't dragging the past with me. I had finally moved on. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one day I realized I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. Work, for the first time in months, didn't feel like a place I had to be. Felt like a place I wanted to be. It started with a project Carlos handed me, a complicated systems overhaul at one of our bigger accounts. Normally, that would have sent me into a panic, but this time I didn't feel that tight knot in my stomach. There was no weight pulling me down. I tackled the project head-on, breaking it into smaller tasks, making decisions quickly, and communicating with the team without second-guessing myself. It felt good. It felt like I was actually back in the game, instead of just going through the motions. Carlos pulled me aside after the meeting, a rare thing for him. "Nice work on the Wilson account," he said, his voice low, like he was genuinely impressed. "You've been stepping up lately. Keep it up." It was one of those compliments that hit different because it wasn't expected. It wasn't forced. It was real. And for the first time, I felt like I deserved it. I wasn't just putting in the hours anymore. I was actually getting better at my job. The next week, I remembered something that had been buried for a while. Back when Mallory and I were trying to figure out our lives together, I'd mentioned volunteering at a local youth center. It had been an offhand comment, a memory from before everything had gotten messy. I'd wanted to do it, but Mallory had always brushed it off. "We're too busy," she'd said. "We don't have the time." And just like that, I'd let it go. But now, with nothing weighing me down, I realized I could finally do it. So I signed up. I started volunteering at the center a couple of nights a week, tutoring kids who were struggling in school. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was rewarding. I worked with Leah and Tyrese mostly, two kids who couldn't have been more different, but both of them pushed me to the edge of my patience. Leah, the quiet one, always shy and hesitant, would stare at her math problems like they were written in another language. Tyrese, on the other hand, was full of energy, jumping from one thing to the next, distracted, always talking about everything except the homework in front of him. At first, it felt like I wasn't getting through to them. I'd sit there, explaining things over and over, wondering if anything was sticking. But then I'd catch the small moments. The way Leah's eyes would light up when she finally understood something, or how Tyrese would focus for a full 5 minutes, his expression intense as he worked through a problem on his own. It felt good. There was a simplicity to it, a purpose that wasn't tied to performance reviews or project deadlines. Helping them with something that seemed so small in the grand scheme of things. Passing a test, getting the right answer, even just learning to sit still and focus, it made me feel like I was doing something that actually mattered. And, maybe for the first time in a long time, I felt needed. Not in the way Mallory had once needed me, with all the expectations and demands, but in a real, uncomplicated way. These kids weren't looking for anything from me except guidance, and they didn't care about the rest of my life. They didn't even know about the mess I'd been through. They just needed help with their homework. It wasn't easy. Some nights I felt like I was hitting a wall with Tyrese, and Leah's quiet resistance was like a puzzle I couldn't solve. But every time I left the center, it felt like I was carrying something with me that I didn't have before. It was like I was starting to fill up the empty spaces inside me with something real. Something that didn't involve betrayal, didn't involve Mallory, didn't involve anything but being present. And I liked it. I liked being there for them. It wasn't just about doing something good for them, it was about doing something good for me, too. It was a fresh start, something small, but it was mine. And it felt right. I'd finally found a way to move forward, one step at a time. It started with a post on a meetup board, something about a weekend hiking group. I didn't know what I was expecting when I signed up. Maybe just a chance to get out of the house, burn off some energy, clear my head. But it turned into something more. The first hike was a blur of strangers. People who didn't know me, didn't know what I'd been through, didn't care. I liked that. I liked being just another face in the crowd, not the guy whose wife had an affair. I didn't have to answer any questions about my life. For once, I could just breathe. There was Jamie, the city planner, always talking about new projects and zoning laws with the kind of excitement that made me feel like a kid who had no idea what they wanted to be when they grew up. Then there was Wes, the graphic designer, who had the kind of laid-back energy that made everything feel easy. He'd tell random stories about clients who didn't know what they wanted, and we'd all laugh at how familiar it felt. Dana, the engineer, was quieter but had a dry humor that crept up on you. And when she spoke, it was with that kind of confidence you couldn't help but respect. We didn't talk about anything deep, no probing questions about each other's pasts. It was just the hike, the fresh air, and the sound of footsteps crunching through dirt and gravel. The world felt big again, but not overwhelming. Afterward, we'd go to a diner for breakfast, the greasy kind with too much coffee and eggs that stuck to the plate. We'd talk about random things, movies we liked, where we'd traveled, things we hated about the city. Nothing heavy, just people sharing space. And I liked it. I liked being just Jude, the quiet guy at the table who smiled when Wes cracked a joke or joined in when Dana talked about her last project. It was simple, but it was real. It felt good to be around people who didn't want anything from me except a good conversation. On Sundays, I'd call my parents. I didn't have to explain anything to them. They never asked about Mallory or the mess I was still cleaning up. They'd just pick up the phone, and we'd fall into our old rhythms. My mom would ask about work, always with the same warmth in her voice. My dad would talk about football or the weather or some random project he was doing around the house. It was like I could breathe again. like I was a person, not a victim, not a walking disaster. One Sunday, I went over to their place for lunch. My mom had made pozole, my favorite. I sat at the table, the smell of the broth filling the air, and for a few hours everything felt normal again. My mom didn't ask any hard questions, didn't push. She just kept the conversation light, talking about how my cousin was getting married next month, how the dog had chewed up one of my dad's shoes, how the garden was doing. It was the kind of comfort I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't about them fixing anything. It was about being in a space where nothing was expected of me except to show up. That night, when I got back home, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the message was strange, brief but direct. Dorian officially retired. Pressure from the board and everything else. We're doing well, though. I've launched a STEM scholarship program with part of the settlement. I read it twice before it sank in. Dorian was out, officially out, and the world kept spinning. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me thought I should feel satisfaction, some sense of victory. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't a win. It was just over. Dorian's career, Mallory's life, all of it, it was done. And maybe it was because I'd moved on. Maybe because I'd found new things to care about, but I didn't feel much of anything. I just put the phone down and went to bed, the kind of sleep that felt like a deep breath, easy and full. A few weeks ago, the thought of this would have kept me up at night. But now, it was just another piece of the puzzle I didn't have to obsess over. It was someone else's mess, not mine. The next weekend, I was back on the trail with Jamie, Wes, and Dana. The world felt bigger, easier to navigate, and the best part was that I wasn't carrying it all alone anymore. I started therapy a few weeks later. It wasn't something I'd been planning to do, but it felt like the right step. Dr. Ruthers wasn't like the therapists I'd seen in movies. No deep couches, no grand insights about my childhood. She focused on boundaries, healthy systems. The first session was awkward. I wasn't used to talking about myself without purpose, without a reason. I didn't know what to expect, but Dr. Ruthers asked questions that made me think not about the past, but about how I was dealing with things now, how I was handling the fallout, how I was setting up the walls around me to protect myself from everything that had already come crashing down. She introduced me to the idea of boundaries, not just the usual don't let people walk all over you kind of advice, but real, working systems that helped you function without constantly sacrificing your peace of mind. We talked about how I could say no without explaining, without justifying. How I could put my needs first and not feel guilty about it. The first time I used that new mindset, it felt strange. It was like I was testing it out, seeing if I could hold my ground without feeling like I was a bad person for doing so. Sienna called a couple of days later. "Hey Jude, can you help me with my lease?" she said, sounding frazzled. "I'm trying to figure out this mess with the apartment. I don't know who else to turn to. I could really use your help." My first instinct was to say yes, to fix it like I always did. But I remembered Dr. Ruthers' voice in the back of my head. It's okay to say no. So I did. I said, "No, I can't help with that. I'm sorry." I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't try to soften it. I just said it and it felt good. It wasn't rude. It wasn't cold. It was just firm. Sienna didn't say anything at first, and then the silence stretched between us, heavy and uncertain. "Okay," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'll figure it out." I hung up without a second thought. The weird part came after. My phone buzzed twice with follow-up messages. I didn't respond. Not right away. Not ever. Felt strange to just leave it. To not get sucked back into someone else's chaos. I kept thinking about it, wondering if I'd done the wrong thing. But as the day went on, it hit me. I didn't feel bad. I felt powerful. Like I was finally getting control over how much of my time, my energy, I was willing to give away. It was a simple thing, but it was a breakthrough. The next few days, I started applying that same boundary setting at work. I'd been answering calls after hours, getting pulled into emails and last-minute requests. It had become the norm, and I'd let it slide because it felt like the right thing to do. But not anymore. I emailed Carlos one afternoon saying, "From now on, I'll be offline after 6 p.m. unless it's an emergency." At first, it felt like I was going to get pushback, but he just responded, "Understood. Thanks for the heads up." It wasn't a big deal, but it was a step in reclaiming my time. No more late-night emails. No more overextending myself to be the go-to guy for everything. Felt like the smallest change, but it shifted something inside me. I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to take back control of my life. A week later, my cousin had a wedding. I didn't really want to go. It was a big family event, and I wasn't in the mood for the usual questions. But I went, because it was family and I could handle it. I showed up, wearing a shirt that was probably a little too fancy for the occasion, but that made me feel like I wasn't just a guy who'd been through a disaster. I was me, just me. And when my aunt asked how I'd been, I gave her a smile and said, "I'm doing well. Really well, actually." "Are you dating anyone?" she asked, her voice too high-pitched, the kind of question that always came with the unspoken weight of "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "I'm focusing on myself right now." She didn't press, and that was it. I realized most people didn't actually care about the details, they just wanted the surface updates. So I gave them exactly that. No drama, no explanations. Just facts. When my uncle asked how work was going, I gave him a brief answer and moved on. It wasn't hard, but it felt different. I wasn't feeling like I had to prove something or make up an excuse for why things had fallen apart. I realized then that the boundaries I was setting weren't just about saying no to others. They were about saying yes to myself, giving myself the space to be who I wanted to be, without needing validation or permission from anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, I felt normal again. Not perfect, not whole, but normal. Like I could handle the next chapter of my life without losing myself in it. When I left the wedding, I didn't feel drained. I felt light, like a weight had been lifted, not by any one thing, but by the simple act of standing my ground. Saying no, setting limits, and finally letting myself breathe without the guilt. It was the beginning of something new, and for the first time in ages, I wasn't afraid of what came next. It was a Sunday afternoon when I ran into Sienna's old friend at the grocery store. I was grabbing a few things, some coffee beans, eggs, a new bag of spinach, and I turned the corner of the aisle and nearly bumped into her. She was standing there, her cart full of produce, and she smiled when she saw me. "Jude, wow, you look great," she said, her tone a little too high-pitched, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I smiled back, polite but brief. "Thanks." She didn't stop there. "I heard about Sienna. She's been going through a tough time. And Dorian, well, he's still—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking to the side like she wasn't sure whether to keep going. "But they're getting better, Things are." She gave a little shrug, like it was supposed to mean something. I nodded, pretending to listen, but in reality, I couldn't have cared less. She kept talking, offering details I didn't ask for. About Sienna's new job, about Dorian's latest PR stunt to clean up his image, the kind of updates I'd have been desperate for a couple of years ago. But not now. I wasn't angry. I wasn't curious. I just felt nothing. When she finally ran out of things to say, I gave her a polite smile, said, "Well, that's good to hear," and walked away without waiting for her to finish her sentence. There was no need to engage. No need to look back. It wasn't my story anymore. It wasn't even a story I cared to hear. Later, back at home, I looked around. The apartment was exactly what I'd made of it. Mine, in every way. The walls were still that deep slate blue I'd chosen when everything felt like it was falling apart. The couch, sleek and comfortable, reflected the new version of me. Simple, but solid. The espresso machine hummed softly on the counter, something I used daily, and the snake plant in the corner was still thriving. Proof that I could nurture something, even if it wasn't people. I sat on the couch, watching the afternoon light fade, and my phone buzzed. A text from the youth center, a tutoring request from Leah and Tyrese. I didn't hesitate. I accepted instantly. It wasn't a big deal, but it felt good. I was needed. I was helping. It was a moment that reminded me that, no matter what had happened in the past, I could still make a difference in someone's life without the baggage, without the history. That evening, after the session, I sat on the porch with a cup of espresso in hand, the cool night air just starting to settle in. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, and the sound of distant cars on the highway was a low hum in the background. And then it hit me, a simple truth that wasn't so simple at all. Peace wasn't about winning. It wasn't about seeing Dorian or Mallory or anyone else pay for what they'd done. It was about not caring if they lost. Peace was in the indifference, in the quiet space between the past and the future, where I didn't need anything from them or anyone else to feel whole, where I didn't need an apology or answers or revenge. It was just me, sitting on my porch, drinking coffee, watching the sky, and for the first time in a long time I realized that was enough.